if there is a conversation that I'm extremely excited about today, it is definitely this one. We've had some other really good ones as well too. But this is an area where we can always do a better job. And when I say that, I really, really mean it. And so much so that I'm actually going to remove myself from this conversation because I think it's much more important that the four of you are driving it, all right? We have the talking points. I'll drop them in the chat. But I just want to do a quick round of introductions first. So Lisa, since we did see you earlier, but can you just let everybody know who you are, what you do?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Lisa. Full name Lisa Marie Amphy. I run a very large user group here in the San Francisco Bay Area, the Cloud Native Containers, and I've been running it for many years. Started out as an OpenStack user group and then morphed into Docker and then Mesosphere and Kubernetes. Mostly lately, it's been a lot of Kubernetes and containers. So it's been really, really fantastic getting to know a lot of the community. Of course, for the last few years, it was virtual, so it's become an international user group as well. And through that, I've gotten to meet wonderful people like Bart and so many other community members. I'm also a CNCF ambassador, as is Bart. So spending a lot of time in the CNCF community advocating for open source and a lot of the CNCF ecosystem projects. And then by day, I am the head of developer relations at Cockroach Labs, which is the amazing company that brings CockroachDB to this world, a fantastic open source distributed SQL database. Happy to meet everybody on the call, meeting some people for the first time here.
Very, very good. Excellent intro. And as you can see, Lisa's a very active person. I shared her Twitter earlier, so you can check out all the stuff she's doing. Next up, we've got Alex. What's up?
Hey, Bart. That was my first time seeing you rap that one live. That was very, that was excellent.
Thank you.
All right,
anyway, so who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, I'm Alex Rowell. I am a community manager at SignalWire. They're software-defined telecom, real-time APIs, the general communications sphere, and they are the primary maintainers of FreeSwitch, which is a huge open source project. So I run that community, and I'm actually an interesting one because I'm a recent corporate transplant. So I'm most recently from Microsoft and kind of switching over from the super corporate world into open source.
All right. Okay, good. Very, very nice to have you with us. Next up, we've got Courtney. And Courtney is no stranger to the DoK community, and she also lives about an hour away from where I am. So we also have another person in the call too who's also quite close, but we'll get to her in a second. Courtney, who are you and what do you do?
Hi, so really great to be back in the DoKC. It's been a while. I'm Courtney Nickerson. I do live just about an hour away from Bart, although we only ever see each other virtually. We never actually get together in person for some crazy reason. I just recently transported myself professionally into the open source world, moving from the world of DevSecOps and a local startup where we did lots and lots and lots of security things and had quite an active community around our tool. But now I'm working as a developer advocate for KubeShop, which is a very cool startup that is promoting different types of tools that are all open source at this point for specifically Kubernetes. My current focus is on a cool tool called Monocle and promoting that one that helps people manage all of their crazy manifests in K8s and gives them their errors very clearly and picks up their workflows. But there are loads of other projects that KubeShop is working on, including tools for testing and other things to make deployments much easier and break down those communication silos between teams. And it's a super cool company, very diverse, with a lot of inclusion and equity going on. So super excited to be here.
Very, very good. Awesome. Last but certainly not least, we have someone who was living in a different place and is now quite, probably even 15 minutes away from where I am right now. Her name is Iraide. Yeah. And so if you can introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
Sure. My name is Iraide Ruiz, and I am an engineering manager in Twilio. I've been working here for 4 or 5 months. I relocated from London back in December. I spent 10 years living over there. I have a developer background. I've been a developer for about 8 years, and 3-4 years ago, I transitioned into a people manager's role. I have worked in different companies, really big ones like Cisco, small startups in central London, and I've been in different industries like finance, sports betting. So I've seen a bit of many good and bad things. And I've always been quite active in the D&I space, especially in the last 4 and 5 years. So it was really good to meet Bart the other day virtually, and really glad to be here today.
Awesome. That being said, all right, I encourage all of our panelists, take the gloves off. All right, we have to be as brutally honest as possible, because if not, these issues just don't get addressed, right? We are trying to address things about how we treat each other in spaces, how we take things, and this is where we're going to start out with first. What is even DEI if we're approaching this, all right, as a newcomer, right, as a beginner, right? Because some people maybe aren't familiar with this term. But we really want to be as straightforward as possible. We don't need to dodge around things. Like I said, this is something that we know we need to improve in our community. We have to do a better job. And we're never going to do it too well, all right? So just to get this started out, I would like to establish kind of a working definition. And since we don't have a ton of time, let's try to keep our responses nice and snappy. But Lisa, could we start out with you? How do you define DEI?
Yeah, so diversity and inclusion is how it was said for a long time. And the E is, I think, so important to add. It's the equity part. So it's the accountability, in my opinion. So if you're talking about diversity and inclusion, please always talk about DE&I. That accountability addresses things like the wage gap. It makes sure that these corporations are accountable. This isn't just a numbers game that gets buried in an HR department, but that accountability goes all the way up to the board, and CEOs are responsible for making this happen. There's metrics that are like, you don't get your bonuses if you don't meet your hiring goals and diversity goals. So in my opinion, diversity and inclusion is like being asked to the dance, but and being asked to dance. But the equity part is really about making sure that that things are very equal and very fair, and that you're addressing the gaps in underrepresented minorities and in hiring and pay.
All right, good. I think that's a pretty solid definition to start out with. Now let's see examples of where we see this and where we don't see this. Let's start with you, Alex. What's your experience been related to this? What have you seen that's perhaps worked in other areas where maybe it needs to be improved?
I think I want to build a little bit on something Lisa said there, which is like the E is super important. So D&I, you end up with things like we should have a monthly happy hour. We should get the women together to talk, right? The women. And with DEI, you're doing more things like, let's understand why there aren't as many women in telecom, or why telecom's a white man's game, right? So why did that happen? How do we bridge that gap? How do we actually make this space more inclusive instead of just let's like pay lip service to it? Something that I've seen at SignalWire that's really useful is they have like a dedicated driving group that's like, let us actually get more underrepresented voices into the space and give them the space to talk, whether that's at conventions or like in the company itself.
All right. Good. And like you said, building on that. And once again, I think it was nice that you mentioned too the very unfortunately frequent sort of sprinkling of, we're gonna create a little space here. Like you said, double down on that E for equity and what that means, and perhaps different strategies to make sure that happens. Courtney, in your experience?
Yeah, so I've just joined CubeShop, and I think one of the shocking things for me has been the drastic difference here where I am right now. Within a week and a half of being here, there were quite a few men on our development teams that reached out saying, hey, I know you're in a dev role position. I've got this woman who's involved in, and she might be great for you to talk to. We need more women on our teams because we're having communication issues, which I did also find to be a unique thing where they were like, we don't know how to talk to each other, but since we've added more women onto our team, they are raising the issues that maybe we're not aware of, or not aware that they need to be raised, and seeing that there is, at least where I am, a group of people in general who are quite open to bringing these things to the forefront. That said, in other places, positions, communities that I've been in, that is not always the case. And so it has been refreshing to be somewhere where this is something that just seems to form part of what people are doing and thinking about in their everyday lives. But have been involved in other communities where I've heard people say things like, well, we don't really need more equity. I mean, look, there are women here. And in the group, there's like 20 men and 3 women. And it's like, that's not really the equity we're talking about. We're not talking about making it into the room, because women, frankly, were the ones who started coding. So we're not talking about making it into the room and doing the small work. We're talking about being equally represented. And so I think that is a viewpoint that oftentimes people don't realize. And it's not just for women, obviously. There are loads of other subgroups that just aren't even included in these spaces. I was speaking to a friend today about this talk, and I said, and what do you think we should add? And he said, well, accessibility. I grew up next to the Navajo reservation, and there are people that don't even have access to the internet, let alone any other type of tech. So how can we consider including those types of people and communities? So inclusion and equity for them as well. And those are things that I think need to be considered throughout the future of these types of conversations.
Great. Like you said, there's a whole level of depth that people just completely aren't aware of. Some cases not necessarily their fault, but let's make an effort to make these things not so strange and not sound like these crazy kind of idea. Iraide, what about you and your experience?
Yeah, so, well, I'm of the opinion that companies have social responsibility and they really need to engage with this type of topics. They normally have a lot of power and a lot of money. So from my point of view, what really works is make senior leaders accountable for things like this. And this is normally when changes start to happen. Some good examples of things that can be done to improve diversity is, for example, creating internship opportunities for people from diverse backgrounds that might not have the chance to go to university and maybe formally educate in tech. I have seen initiatives like those being done in companies. We do it in Twilio, and we used to do it in a company I used to work for before, and we have delivered really good results. And there are other things, for example, like publishing the pay gap, and having this analysis to see that if we are really treating our workforces equally when it comes to gender. Obviously, this is not the only dimension that we have to worry about, but gender is the topic that I normally work with. But as I said, I believe that making big people in the company accountable for these things, for delivering results, is what drives normally change.
Good. It's like you said, different source of influence, but it starts at the top. And so if we're getting a feeling that it's not really, there isn't that kind of commitment, then perhaps this is something that needs to be addressed. When it comes to that, though, internally in an organization, what are the mechanisms that need to be in place? Maybe, Lisa, could you talk about some of the initiatives that are ongoing in Cockroach or other places where you've worked where these things were anticipated, as Iraide was mentioning, in terms of accessibility and other things, as Courtney was mentioning, the lack of the assumptions that Alex brought up as well. What are some of the things that, best practices that companies can have inside so that these things are addressed properly?
Yeah, I can absolutely talk about what we're doing at Cockroach. It's by far the most incredible programs that of any place I've worked. I've had everywhere else I've worked would be an example of what not to do. But at Cockroach, it's incredible. It starts with an incredibly open source. Our hiring policies are legendary. They're all on GitHub. You can read about them. It's a non-bias way of hiring. You don't see resumes beforehand, so you don't have a preconceived notion of, oh, they went to this college, they're going to be a good engineer, things like that. A lot of recruiting efforts at from public schools, from community colleges, just an incredible job from the people team to make sure that we are sourcing talent from all over and that we have a very fair hiring policy. Again, I mentioned that the accountability has to go all the way up to the board. So our CEO is gold on our diversity numbers, and constantly talks about how we need to get better, even though this is by far the most diverse place I've ever worked. He's always talking about how we can do better. And so, in DevRel, I think we have some advantages. I have an incredibly diverse team. Not every division is, it has done as well with the diversity numbers. So that's something to think about too. Why are certain underrepresented minorities always ending up in the same departments over and over again? Marketing has a lot of women. That's where usually you'll make your numbers. We're more than 50% female marketing team. Not all of the teams are like that, but also what about the rest of the underrepresented minority categories? So I think for best practices, figure out an unbiased way of hiring. There's lots of software out there that even talks about how you wrote your job rec. There's bias written into, job recs and how you can get that out of there. There's definitely, the accountability all the way up to the top is the main thing. And then just regular check-ins. And then once you hire, retention is also a huge thing. We are building inclusive, diverse communities where we want everybody to feel valued and have a sense of purpose and a sense of place. And that's a nurturing, ongoing thing, or you're going to lose your talent as well.
Wow, very, very good. So yeah, quite comprehensive and in different areas that you mentioned. From the framing of a job description, from where it's placed, some of the sometimes filtering or screening that can happen based on this kind of a degree or that kind of a degree, or anyway, a lot of these things that can be there. Alex, in your experience, what are some of the things that you've encountered along the way where it's made you think, well, this could be improved?
So I've come from the corporate background. So the big one that I always see is the hard requirement of a university degree. Like you get automatically disqualified from hiring if you don't have a 4-year degree. And I have several folks that I've worked with very closely that don't have a degree, that are self-taught, or that are just rock solid engineers or SEO people, or they're in their space, they're experts. And they don't, there's no way for them to get through a corporate hiring process. They just get scrubbed out immediately. So having a human element in the corporate hiring process, I think, is really a space where they can improve and actually look at skills versus did you check all the boxes?
Very, very good points. Allowing people an opportunity to show areas where they shine that might not be a diploma.
Mm-hmm.
I have a master's degree, everybody, and I'm completely useless. All right, I am very impractical. It does not matter. There are 2 pieces of paper, and I'm still paying for my student loan for the second one, which shows how not smart I am. And that was 10 years after. So yeah, anyway, great financial planning skills. But like I said, I really hear you on that. And academic institutions are great. I had a wonderful experience at university, but there are so many other ways, and particularly in tech. One of my best friends here in the north of Spain is someone who left university at the age of 19 and is now the CTO of an industrial startup that focuses on artificial intelligence and blockchain technologies for smart contracts and all this stuff. And he does not, and then there are other people I know that have PhDs and MBAs that are doing amazing things. I think that's a really, really good point. And I think that we need to find ways to be looking for other skills. And also as well too, we see that having people from different backgrounds and having people who have studied different things or have not studied the same things and have worked in different industries come in with lots of different kinds of insights. So anyway, that's good. Let's move it over to you, Courtney. What's been something? And I'm sorry, we don't have a ton of time, so let's get our answers really, really short. What are things that have struck you where this could be improved, this isn't right, this doesn't sit well with me?
Sure. So I wholeheartedly agree with what Alex just said. Definitely the university degree is one of the things, as well what you studied or didn't study. Come across quite a few people who, like myself, non-coders who frankly are very, very good at other things in tech, but kind of get discarded because they're coming from a non-technical background. So I think a background in general, people just have so many other skills that have nothing to do with what you did or didn't study in a school atmosphere to be considered. And the other thing that I think needs to be considered is when people do social team building activities, Actually considering the people that are going to be involved in that group, making sure that you mix groups appropriately, that they don't do things like here's a chat for the women and a happy hour for the men, because they just assume that women are the ones who are at home taking care of their kids. There are also dads who aren't going to be able to make that a happy hour chat because they're doing other things at home with their family. And also considering that maybe, I mean, specifically this month, there are more than one religion that are celebrating different things, taking that into consideration when people take their vacation time, when they're talking about what's going on in their personal lives and whether they can be involved in a project wholeheartedly or not. So I think those are things that can definitely be done better and should have some focus put on.
Got it. Good. And like you said, the religion factor, and you know, like if you're in a meeting with people if you think might be observing Ramadan, ask, and then don't eat a sandwich while they're fasting. I mean, just really basic courtesy stuff. It's not crazy. You don't need any degrees to know that. Zero. Let's move it over to you, Iraide. What are things that you've seen or experienced that made you had that reaction as well too? This definitely needs to be improved.
Yeah, I can give you a very clear example. For a company I worked for, the head of the department told me, "Oh, I really like this guy. He reminds me of me when I was his age." And that was like a really terrible thing to hear, because there are so many things implied there, like this guy is going to be promoted because he looks like me, because he reminds me of myself. And I thought, oh, wow, we really have to put a lot of effort in defining really objective ways of promoting in the technology path, because we cannot have this subtleness and leave it to people's biases and personal opinions to decide who got what it takes to be promoted to the next level. That's just one example. And my personal opinion very quickly, we have to start putting way more emphasis and really evaluate more the soft skills or the core skills, like I like to call them, of the people when we hire them and when we help them promote within the company. Because especially in the technology world, we work as part of a team. So if we fail in these really core skills like communication, empathy, kindness, it's going to be extremely difficult for people to get anywhere good.
Yep, good. And for people that have difficulty measuring those kinds of skills, there are ways to do that. All right, so don't think that like it's only a coding test. No, there could be other things that we need to understand here. Now, we've been talking about things at an organizational level. We've seen how this works. Some great insights here. The last part I want to spend just a quick lightning round. You know, our community is predominantly in a digital space, all right? So we're on Slack, we're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn, et cetera. We do have a code of conduct. We can do a better job of making it present. There's also a difference that I learned from Lisa between a code of conduct and moderation policies in places like Slack, all right? So I want all four of you to think about practical tips that we can think about how to make sure that DEI doesn't just stay as a human resources or talent management policy, but that it's also living and breathing in these spaces where we're interacting with each other in terms of how we treat each other, right? So I want each one of you just to think about one point that you can make about that, and we will start with you, Lisa.
Sure. Online communities this is something you have to think very carefully about, because when you don't have that accountability staring you in the face, people tend to get a little bit more relaxed about what they'll write in an online community. And it's actually worse. There's a record of it. It stays around for everybody to see. It's not something you can just apologize for immediately. You don't see the reaction in someone's face when you say something and then realize, because you get a social cue that, oh, maybe I know I didn't mean it that way, but it was taken the wrong way. It's so important to think about this in online communities. So please, especially if language is an issue and you're typing in a language that isn't your first language, culturally, you might say something that's okay in one culture that isn't in another. So think about these things globally and just err on the side of being incredibly kind, incredibly empathetic. And if you're running one of these online communities, you have to address this stuff. We have a zero tolerance policy in our Slack channel, but I do take the time to explain to the person why it is that they're, being dealt with. And that way they will not make the mistake, hopefully, in their next community. So please think very carefully about this when you're involved in online communities.
This is a great point. I think also it's a responsibility in someone as myself in a community leadership position that we need to make it really easy for people to find that information and know, like, when you're coming into our space, it's not just any Slack channel. Like, we have, specific guidelines and rules that need to be respected in order for you to be able to participate here and for everybody else to feel the same, level of being welcome and protected. So great insight there. Let's keep it moving. Alex.
So last week I had to ban someone from our community for sexually harassing the women in the community via DM. And obviously that's against our rules. We're zero tolerance. We're banning that person. But the next step is being accountable to your community with the, hey, we had a recent moderation action, reminder on these rules. If you were made to feel uncomfortable, feel free to reach out, and creating that space for the people beyond the few that said something to me, right? That, hey, this is still a safe space. We're still enforcing the rules and something got through, but we're taking action.
I think that's a good point too. Once accountability. If people don't see that there's not response or consequences for actions, then it just looks like an empty thing that's written on a website or somewhere. They need to see that it's living and breathing. And there are different ways to do that. You can do that artistically. We can do that with music. We can do that in different ways of incorporating it. But find a way to make it present, and so that everyone's aware that it's there. I think it's a great point. Courtney.
Yeah, I would say that especially in teams that are moderating conversations, make sure that they are definitely diverse and include a variety of people in them from various backgrounds, and using different languages as well, in order to be able to help provide the type of moderations necessary for your community. And as well, create channels where people can talk about exactly these types of things, whether it's on a professional level or what's going on in the community, but have your moderators actually start creating conversations around these points when necessary, especially if you've had an incident within your digital community, in order to make sure that everyone is on the same page, or at least thinking about this in a forward thinking and inclusive manner.
Very, very good. Address the elephant in the room. Don't just leave it there. It'll just disappear. It's not going to. People know that. People will notice. And like you said as well, too, make sure that you have people on your team that have different eyes and ears and are going to be sensitive to things that, because of your background, that you may not necessarily keep in mind. I think that's a big point, too, was being mentioned previously about biases, about what Iraide was saying as well, too. If I see somebody that's kind of in my own image and things like that, without breaking down, well, where does my image come from, and where do my beliefs and prejudices come from, and why, maybe I'm blinding myself to a lot of things that could be even more beneficial for my organization. So anyway, I think good points there. Last but not least, Iraide, let's finish up.
Yeah, I guess something really valuable is to say something, highlight when you see something written on a chat which doesn't sound good. I want to believe that most people will not want to hurt you intentionally. They might just say something and maybe they hurt your feelings. So it's better to honestly say, hey, you told me this and I don't think that's very appropriate. And same way, even if it's not directed to you and it's directed to someone else, you can just maybe spot it and say something about it. And I really like what Courtney say about having dedicated chat rooms to talk about this type of things, because it raises awareness with everyone.
Exactly, and also whether it's in a physical or in a digital space, that there's a protocol and a place where you can go to address these things. If you feel like I'm seeing something wrong, but maybe I'm going to get in trouble if I say something, it needs to be abundantly clear to people that they're not going to get in trouble for following along with the very guidelines that you want to be presenting. So anyway, we need to continue this conversation. We need to set a date to keep this going. I really liked everything that we were able to share today, and I know wholeheartedly it's something we need to improve, and I look forward to doing that together. So I will be rewatching this talk for sure, and thinking about how we can better apply these things in our community. So you can all expect an email from me asking for help, because like I said, there's some great stuff here about how we can build on this for our community. But I really, really appreciate all the things that you shared today, and I thank you for joining us. So thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Bart. Thanks for including this amazing topic on your agenda. Super important.
Yep. Thank you all very much.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care. Cheers.
Bye.